Old-fashioned murder and mayhem. The Labor Czar murder. Joseph Buck Newell, 1943. It could have been mobsters. It might have been dirty cops. It could even have been disgruntled laborers who had been shaken down one too many times. But it was a 16-year-old boy who put 5 bullets into St. Louis's notorious labor czar, 38-year-old Joseph Buck Newell, one night in June 1943. When Newell's wife, Juanita, called the police the evening of June 3rd, Jefferson County Sheriff Amos Lee arrived at the sumptuous home in Jerry's Acres near Peevely, Missouri, to investigate. Mrs. Newell said she had left her home around 6 o'clock that morning because her husband had 3 associates at the house and she didn't usually stay there when business was being discussed. Since her husband was expected to be home when she returned, she had not taken her house key. However, when she arrived home around 7 p.m., the house was locked and Buck didn't answer the door. She said she became suspicious something was wrong because Newell's car was missing and there was a broken window. When the sheriff went inside to investigate, he found a loaded .45 caliber automatic pistol lying on the dining table. Realizing something was amiss, he instructed Juanita to stay put. Upon entering the bedroom, he saw the body of Newell at the foot of the bed with the blood-soaked bed covers thrown over him. Only his feet protruded from the nest of coverings. When he pulled back the blankets, he found Newell clad only in his boxer shorts, dead. Lee reported that, quote, he had been shot 5 times in the back. There were 2 bullet holes in the mattress indicating he had been shot twice while lying in bed and 3 more times after he rolled to the floor, end quote. When called into the room to identify the body, Juanita was so upset it took several minutes before she could make a coherent statement. Little did the sheriff know that Mrs. Newell was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance for his benefit. She knew a lot more about what had happened than she was letting on. Welcome to another episode of Old-Fashioned Murder and Mayhem. I am your host, Mindy Hudson, bringing you stories of murder and scandalous events with a twist of genealogy. Today's episode covers the 1943 murder of Joseph Buck Newell, a notorious labor czar in St. Louis, Missouri. Following the Prohibition era, gangsters moved their attention from bootlegging to labor unions. It was a perfect opportunity to manipulate the flow of money and power between the laborer, management, and governing officials. With the country coming out of the Great Depression and another world war on the horizon, mobsters muscled their way into control over industries with strong armed tactics, strikes, and violence in the 1930s and 1940s. Juanita Geraldine Vincent, daughter of Matthew Vincent and Mary Molly Jackson, was born in East St. Louis, Illinois, about 1907. The youngest of 7 children, she was tall, thin, with dark hair and eyes. She also had a penchant for bad boys. When she was about 19 years old, she married Joseph Grasswick, a chauffeur, which was often 1920s era code for gangster. In February 1927, she fled home to her parents with her infant son William, called Sonny, because Joseph was abusing her. Juanita threatened her husband that her brothers would not stand for that kind of treatment. No one got away with beating their sister. Grasswick simply picked up a butcher knife and said he'd wait for Ralph, 22, to show up and try to do something about it. Ralph and Walter Vincent arrived at the residence at 700 Pennsylvania Avenue in East St. Louis. and struggled with Grasswick, trying to wrestle the knife out of his hand. While Walter held him, Ralph found a hammer and beat Grasswick in the head. He was taken to St. Mary's Hospital, but died about a week later due to the injuries. Both brothers were arrested and tried for murder. However, they were acquitted by a jury on a plea of self-defense. For a time, Juanita and Sonny moved home with her parents, but it didn't take long for her to become restless. Then along came Joseph Buck Newell, leader of the St. Louis AFL Hoisting Engineers Union. Dubbed the Labor Czar because of his strong-arm tactics with which he extorted workers, contractors, and policemen, he ran his operation with an iron fist. To Juanita, he was exciting and powerful. Despite his reputation for violence and mob connections, or perhaps because of it, Juanita was enamored. For a time she moved in with him, leaving her son with her parents. They married in 1927 after Newell got his position as agent for the hoisting engineers. Newell started out making $50 a week, according to Juanita, but soon was making money faster than he could spend it. Proud of his trophy wife, Newell lavished her with jewelry, furs, and expensive clothes. Big Buck, as he was known to his associates, ruled his union empire like a dictator. Using his clout as union boss and his connections with the Shelton and Tipton gangs in St. Louis, he was able to extort the laborers he was supposed to represent, charging them exorbitant membership fees and forcing them to pay multiple memberships to work. His power continued to grow with his strong-arm tactic of riots and strikes, shutting down entire operations, forcing opponents to yield to his will. In the business world, his word was law, but at home he yielded to his pretty wife's will. She was called Juanita by most of her acquaintances, but Buck preferred her middle name, Geraldine, and nicknamed her Jerry. Buck loved showing off his exotic beauty, and Jerry loved rubbing elbows with the powerful and dangerous movers and shakers of St. Louis. The relationship between Buck and Jerry went along as usual for about 5 years, until things became rocky between them. Jerry made her biggest mistake in that she began to chide him in front of his associates. For Buck, her place was to serve as arm candy. When she became an embarrassment to him, the domestic violence ramped up. He had promised to educate Sonny in the best schools, but the boy kept getting into trouble and eventually got expelled. Despite constantly running interference for him, Jerry blamed Buck when Sonny dropped out of school. Newell told her that it didn't matter. He could teach Sonny whatever he needed to know. He was grooming her son to bring him into his unsavory circle, and with his dysfunctional background, Sonny was a quick study. In addition to the union racketeering, Buck also ran a booking operation, allegedly with the aid of some St. Louis Metropolitan Police officers, including that of Lieutenant Louis Shoulders, whose reputation for shady dealings kept his name in the St. Louis newspapers. Lieutenant Shoulders and at least 2 other officers were eventually charged with being involved in a protection racket funded by Buck Newell. These charges were never proven, however. According to Jerry, Newell was bringing in huge sums of money from his various rackets and hiding it away, as much as $200,000 to $300,000. An FBI investigation uncovered that Newell had up to 21 bank accounts at one time, but the money trail was so well hidden they couldn't find where it went. Newell usually placed properties and accounts in Jerry's name to protect himself. They had multiple properties, but moved often from one to another due to complaints by neighbors over their raucous parties or because they were running from threats made by mobsters and disgruntled associates. The stormy relationship between Buck and Jerry alternated between bouts of beatings and showering of lavish gifts. At one point, he bought a 75-acre plot of land in Pevely, Missouri, near Festus by Highway Z, and put it in Jerry's name. Newell had a rambling white frame house built for her with 6 rooms and a screened porch. They dubbed the estate Jerry's Acres. One article in the Post-Dispatch in 1943 described the interior, quote, "Inside are sumptuous furnishings of hand-carved walnut furniture, thick orchid-colored carpets, tables with tops of mother-of-pearl and wood inlays, drapes, antique china pieces, and mechanical conveniences for comfortable living. For music lovers, there are piano and radio phonograph. For the more worldly inclined is a 16-cubic-foot refrigerator well stocked." End quote. Despite the pampering, Jerry called him out on his broken promises and threatened to expose his illegal activities. This behavior earned her a terrible beating that nearly killed her. In January 1942, she disappeared from the house for several days with her son, his child bride, and her sister, Helen Shannon. Newell's first contact was Louis Shoulders to elicit his aid in finding her. Apparently, she had taken a little insurance policy with her. She had Newell's illegal gambling books. On Sunday, after she had been missing 3 days, Newell called the police to report her disappearance. The description he gave of her showed the changes in his attitude toward her. Describing her as having a large nose and false teeth, he made it obvious she had lost her exotic luster in his eyes. Newell sent Lieutenant Shoulders to the Vincent family to intimidate them into giving information about where she could have gone. According to the family, Newell offered them $5,000 to get her back home. When that didn't get the result he wanted, he sent one of his henchmen to Mrs. Mary Vincent, Jerry's mother. Fortunately, when he tried to get her to come with him to meet with Buck, she refused. She was streetwise enough to understand that she would likely be held as bait to force the family's hand. Still unable to get satisfactory information, Buck threatened to blow up the house where Mrs. Vincent was living, causing the family to remove her to a safer place. Not long after, Lieutenant Shoulders got a call from French Village south of DeSoto, Missouri, with a tip that 2 women had been seen changing license plates on 2 cars a little south of East St. Louis. The witness said they burned some papers on the side of the road, then got into the Packard with Illinois plates and continued their journey south. Jerry's brother, Walter Vincent, chief of the East St. Louis Park Police, also got wind that Newell had the tip about the license change. He later claimed that when he asked Shoulders why he was so interested in getting Miss Newell back, he was told that they wanted to keep the FBI from talking to her before they could. Vincent knew his sisters were headed to New Orleans to hide and feared they would be killed if he didn't intervene. He went there to get them. He checked Jerry into St. Mary's Hospital in East St. Louis to recover from the beating she'd received at Newell's hands and stayed to guard her. After the newspapers got wind of the events, Newell dismissed the entire affair was due to Jerry's quote-unquote nervous condition, and that explanation was generally accepted. She did have a penchant for over-dramatization. She was losing ground with her powerful husband, and the beatings were leaving her less and less attractive. To get his wife back in line, Buck took off with Sonny one afternoon without telling her where he was taking the boy. Jerry understood the not-so-subtle message. He could easily kill him, hide his body, and she'd never know where to find him. The point was well taken, and from that time forward, Jerry realized she had lost whatever influence she had had over Buck. For his part, Sonny was having serious brushes with the law. No stranger to abuse, lawlessness, and violence, when he was 15, Buck gave him a car, which he wrecked 2 weeks later, killing a 42-year-old man, Henry Canaan. In May 1942, he was arrested and charged with burglary, purse snatching, hold-ups, auto theft, and forgery. That same year, he eloped with 15-year-old Eileen Hastings, lying about their ages. They moved in with Buck and Juanita, who often humiliated Eileen and told her to go home to her parents. She finally did. She filed for divorce, and the suit was still pending in June 1943. In the meantime, things were heating up on the labor front. In April 1943, Newell led a group of laborers against workers of the Oil State Company, which had been awarded a government contract to lay a pipeline in Elmo, Missouri, now Scott City, just south of Cape Girardeau. A riot broke out in the rail yards between workers trying to unload pipe and about 100 labor union sympathizers, in which 3 men were sent to the hospital and several others were injured. The State Guard was called in to protect the workers against Newell's union organizers, and Newell was charged with assault to kill. In addition, Newell had been living in a hotel in Cape Girardeau at the time with his beautiful brunette 25-year-old secretary Doris Bay. Flaunting his new lover in front of Jerry and Sonny, they drove out to the house one afternoon, and he ordered Jerry to hand over her jewelry and furs to Doris. The humiliation was soul-crushing. As it turned out, Newell and Bay were brought up on morals charges at the same time as the indictments for assault. Buck decided things were growing too heated for him and returned to Peevely to hide out until the situation cooled down. Obviously, the atmosphere inside the Newell residence was crackling with tension that Wednesday evening on June 2, 1943. Buck didn't want to be there, and Jerry was furious with him for flaunting his mistress in front of her. The argument grew red-hot, and Jerry threatened she could ruin him if she chose. Newell punched her and made her kneel on the floor, holding his gun to her head. She begged him not to kill her, just let her take her things and leave. The arguing went on into the late hours of the night. Finally, Jerry stomped away to sleep on the sun porch. Sonny and Buck continued shouting at one another. Sonny, protective of his mother, was furious at the way Buck treated her. Finally, Buck had enough, picked up his .45 caliber gun and pointed it at Sonny. He quipped that he ought to kill them both and bury their bodies in quicklime. This was no idle threat, and Sonny knew it. Buck went to bed, and 16-year-old Sonny slammed the door to his room. Periodically, Buck would call the boy back into his room and cock the gun, pointed at him, taunting him. Later, Sonny related that he slept a short time but woke up feeling restless and angry. The more he thought about all of it, the angrier he became. Leaning against the wall of his bedroom was a hunting rifle that belonged to Newell. Sonny rose out of the bed and made his way to Newell's bedroom. He stepped in the door, raising the rifle. Buck leaned over to reach for his gun, but before he could get his hands on it, the lad began pumping bullets into his stepfather. 5 bullets struck him in the back, 2 while on the bed, and the other 3 as he rolled off the bed onto the floor. Buck was dead. Fishing around in Buck's wallet, Sonny pulled out $500, which he stuffed into his pocket, hid the gun, and woke his mother. Somehow she had slept through all of the commotion. She panicked when he told her Buck was dead. Even if they could convince the police that Sonny had killed Buck in self-defense, the mobsters and other underworld characters he had in his pocket would be out to seek revenge. The two put their heads together and came up with a plan to make it appear Newell had died by the hands of some of his more unsavory associates. Sonny knocked over furniture and then broke a window. He took the Packard and carried his mother away from the house for the day, instructing her not to return until evening. For his part, he picked up a girlfriend, and the two of them went on a spending spree with Buck's money. Jerry arrived back home around 7 in the evening and called for the local sheriff, Amos Lee, to come check out the house. Her story was that Buck had 3 associates who arrived at the house the previous evening, and they had stayed the night drinking. When she got up and saw they were still there, she decided to get out of the house for the day. She said she had gone shopping all day, and upon returning home the house was dark. She didn't have her keys, since she expected her husband to be home, but he didn't answer the door when she tried to get his attention. She noticed the broken window and became frightened. Already completely terrified about what had really occurred, she was able to feign complete shock and hysteria when the sheriff informed her about Buck's murder. The possibility that Buck had been murdered by associates, especially in light of the recent events, was plausible. They might have gotten away with it. When asked where her son was during all of this, she remarked that it wasn't unusual for him to go out and be gone overnight. As it turned out, the arrest of Sonny came about because he was in Buck's Packard and spending large sums of money. He claimed his stepfather had loaned him the car, but the money was more difficult to explain away. When they took him in to question him further, he broke and admitted he had shot Newell, but insisted it was self-defense. That argument had worked for his Uncle Ralph Vincent when he beat Sonny's father to death, and the boy thought it would work for him too. The trouble was that Newell was a powerful man with many powerful connections. The loss of his clout dipped into the pockets of some very sinister characters. Not to mention, Jerry, who was desperate to save her son from the death penalty, was spilling the beans on Buck's many illegal dealings. Most of Buck Newell's traceable assets were in his wife's name. There were rumors that most of the money he had extorted from workers and companies was buried somewhere. Jerry insisted she had no idea where it was hidden. The only other person who might possibly have known where it was would have been Doris Bay, but she wasn't talking. Because of Buck's death, the morals charges were dropped against her, and she faded into the woodwork. An ironic twist occurred in connection with Newell's funeral. On the day of his murder, the Union of Gravediggers went on strike. The labor czar, who rose to power by leveraging work stoppages, was unable to be buried due to a labor strike. The funeral was held at Calvary Cemetery. Dignitaries and members of his labor union packed the streets. However, his wife and stepson were not present. His body, along with others who had died during the strike, was stored at the mausoleum until after the strike was settled. The trial of William Sonny Grasswick was held September 1943. Because of his age, he was supposed to be tried in juvenile court, but prosecuting attorney W. Oliver Rash asked that he be tried in circuit court. This move opened the way for the prosecution to seek the death penalty. Defense attorney Sigmund Bass represented Grasswick. As the trial commenced, the defense argued that Sonny and his mother had suffered years of abuse and violence at the hands of Newell. He set out to prove the boy had acted in self-defense. However, in a shocking turn of events, midway through the trial, young Grasswick changed his plea to guilty. The move prevented a public airing of Newell's illegal activities in circuit court and saved Sonny from the possibility of receiving a death sentence. Sonny was sentenced for second-degree murder to serve 10 years in Boonsville Reformatory, a juvenile facility in Jefferson City. Upon hearing the verdict, his mother sobbed that her boy should be allowed to go home. She threw herself into his arms while her sisters tried to shield her from the flashing camera bulbs of the newspaper reporters. A couple of weeks into his sentence, Sonny and 3 other inmates escaped from the reformatory, stole a shotgun, and robbed a truck driver. They were quickly recaptured. The stunt added an additional 5 years to his sentence. Over the next 2 years, Jerry and Sonny testified against members of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police, whom they claimed were involved in Newell's gambling protection racket. They accused Lieutenant Louis Shoulders of being chief among the dirty cops on Buck's payroll, and Jerry was convinced he had taken the missing money from Buck's buried cash. Nevertheless, they were never able to prove their accusations. On a side note, in 1953, Shoulders was hailed as a hero for helping to solve the Bobby Greenlease kidnapping murder case. However, he soon found himself embroiled with accusations of perjury pertaining to the handling of the $600,000 ransom money, in which half was missing. The pressure of the accusations caused Shoulders to step down from the department after 27 years, a broken man. He also served a prison term for perjury. After his release, he returned to St. Louis, where he lived until his death in 1962. William Sonny Grasswick was granted parole around 1950, according to a newspaper article in which he was involved in a drunk driving accident. In 1952, he married Mrs. Gertrude Cooper Tyler in Pocahontas, Arkansas. Sonny continued to show up in newspaper articles over the years with charges for burglary and other petty crimes. His tragic life was seemingly doomed from the time of his birth. He ended up in Colorado near Denver, where he died in 1985. Juanita Geraldine Newell returned to East St. Louis, but never remarried. She died in 1980 and is buried in Mount Hope Cemetery in Belleville, Illinois. If Buck Newell's fortune was ever recovered, no one ever knew. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Labor Czar Murder, Joseph Buck Newell. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment so our podcast can grow. I truly enjoy reading your comments and suggestions. I'd like to give a special shout out to my 2 newest true crime fans, Petite Delight 87 and Rachel Ann. Thanks for your support. And join me again next month for another episode of Old-Fashioned Murder and Mayhem.